Hey everybody, Josh Peck here. Glad to be doing this again. Today we're going to talk about the AHNENERBE and NEUSCHWABENLAND, specifically around UFOs and secret bases and things like that. So a really interesting discussion. Now, if this is your first time viewing one of these, this is something that I've been doing frequently within the past few months or so, and it's been working out pretty well. But the basic idea, it's a video book, kind of like an audio book, but with video. So we're going through Steve Quayle's book, Empire Beneath the Ice. He was nice enough to give me permission to do this. Now, if you didn't see the first one, that's totally fine. I'm going to make these videos independent of every other videos in the series. And I don't like using the term series because it's not really a series, even though it's all based on the same book. So don't feel like you have to have watched the first one to understand this one. You'll be able to understand this one just fine. If there's something in this video that comes up that was referenced in an earlier video, I will I'll give a refresher. So for those of you who this is your first time, you'll be able to understand it just fine. And if this is your first time, go ahead and subscribe. There's a little subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can subscribe to my channel, and then you will have access to all past videos, all live videos that we do like this, and all future ones. Also, if you're interested, if you're going to be around the Dallas, Texas area, end of March, early April of this year, go ahead and join me at the Hear the Watchmen conference. It's March 31st through April 2nd. There's a link in the description below, and if you use the promo code PECK, you can get some money off of your tickets. I'll be there. I'll be speaking. I'm really excited to meet all of you. So go ahead and get some tickets and join me there. It'll be a blast. Again, that is Hear the Watchmen conference. So that'll be fun. Okay, so in this video, we are picking up from the last one, but again, if you haven't seen the first one, that's totally fine. We're just gonna we're gonna roll right into it. Now, if you don't have a copy of Steve Quayle's book yet, it's called Empire Beneath the Ice, and you can actually get it at the links that I have in the description below. There's an Amazon link if you prefer Amazon. If you want to get it straight from Steve Quayle's website, there's a link there too. And if you get it at skywatchtvstore.com, there's a link that goes directly to that. You can get another one of Steve's books, and there's a package all around it where you get some extra books and things. So you can check that out. If you do have a copy, go ahead and get it out. We're going to be starting in chapter 3. But again, if you don't, if this is your first time and all you want to do is learn about AHNENERBE UFOs from NEUSCHWABENLAND, and you don't care about anything else, that's totally fine, because that's exactly what we are here to do. Now, this is a live video, so if you want to participate in the chat, that would be great. From time to time, I'll be pausing what we're looking into in the book to answer questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that I do my best to give you enough time to ask questions and everything. So we already got a big turnout, people excited to get going with this. Somebody is asking if I'm going to have Steve Quayle on as a guest. I hope so. He actually did offer when we were emailing back and forth about this project. He said that he would make time to be a guest on the show. So we do have plans to do that. Likely what will happen is a type of exit interview after we're done concluding this his book. We'll probably have him on. I might come back from retirement from hosting the Sharpening Report to do a final interview, one with Steve Quayle. I think that would be great. So all of you, you got a great idea by bringing Steve actually into the conversation. So yes, we will be doing that. So I see Rhonda's here. She's a regular. Hi, Rhonda. Hi, Malav. Good to see you. See you in every video, and that's great. I love seeing the regulars. Jackie's here. Hi, Jackie. Lots of people. Dylan. So I'm glad to see everybody's joining us more and more. Every time we do these, it seems like we get more and more live viewers, so that is really exciting. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Now, we can talk about Stalin's nightmare. Now, the way that Steve has this book laid out is pretty cool. He's got, in the beginning of each chapter, he has a short fictional, well, historically fictional story on how these events might have played out. So it starts off with like a short excerpt that's like a story. a narrative based on his research, how these events may have played out, to introduce each chapter. So we'll go through that first, and I'll turn screen share on so you can follow along. And I don't do that for the whole book because I want to be respectful to Steve's work. But if it's a picture or if it's an excerpt or a quote, usually I'll turn screen share on so you can see what I'm looking at. But again, because there are people out there who would take the screen shares and make their own books out of it and distribute it, we don't do that for the whole book, but just for sections of it. Okay, so I'll turn screen share on here so you can follow along with what I'm seeing. Stalin's nightmare. Stalin sat behind his polished wooden desk, glaring at Soviet counterintelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Klemenko. Tell me again, the Russian dictator demanded. Well, comrade, Klemenko licked his lips and tried to keep looking the Supreme Soviet in the eye. I led a squad to the chancellery in Berlin. We had heard reports of burned corpses. Some said bodies of Hitler and mistress. When we arrived, we found 4 wooden boxes half buried in shell crater near Fuhrer's bunker. He paused. And Stalin asked, his voice echoing in the chamber he called his office. And I sent Private Ivan Churikov into the crater where he opened boxes and found bodies of man and woman and 2 dogs. I don't need to know about the dogs. Yes, the human bodies. They were badly burnt, but man, he looked like Hitler. Looked like, or was it Der Führer? Here's a picture. This is the front page of the U.S. Armed Forces newspaper, Stars and Stripes, May 2nd, 1945. Hitler dead. So that's the cool thing about Steve's book here, too, is there's a lot of pictures. And these are going to be really low res, what you're seeing now, because this is a low res PDF. It's actually just scans from the book. So if you want the actual high quality pictures, get the book. Links in the description below, and you'll have access to those. Comrade, I don't know. Impossible to say. That would be up to medical examiner to determine. Get out, Stalin whispered. Get out before. He waved his hand as if shooing a fly. Out. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock. Klemenko swallowed hard and then saluted, did a ragged about face, and left as quickly as he could, cringing at the squeaking of his leather boots on the polished marble floors. There are rumors. Oh, what blood-curdling rumors, Klemenko thought. Stalin and his temper. I'm fortunate not to be in front of firing squad in some godforsaken forest about to be buried in an unmarked grave. Here's another picture. This is the front cover of the Daily Mail, May 2nd, 1945. So that's, if you get the book, you can read through all that. And in the book, it's actually high quality enough where you can read these entire newspaper articles. So it's really cool. Klemenko wasn't going to tempt fate by staying in the Supreme Soviet's headquarters a moment longer than necessary. He closed the massive door behind him, ignored the armed guards on either side of the entrance, and retreated down the ornate staircase in front of him, with only an act of willpower preventing him from running down the steps in a blind panic. Okay. So that brings us to some useful fictions. Now, although the West would claim that Hitler had shot himself in his bunker, and later, after the fall of the USSR, Russian politicians would claim the same thing, Joseph Stalin had a much different belief. He thought that Hitler might have escaped Berlin and was possibly being hidden away with the other Nazis the U.S. had spirited away during Operation Paperclip. Western nations were unsure what happened to Hitler as well. The chief of the U.S. trial counsel at Nuremberg, Thomas J. Dodd, would say during the trials, and this is a direct quote, "No one can say he, Hitler, is dead." Now, President Harry S. Truman apparently tried to get some information about Hitler's death by asking Stalin point blank during the Potsdam conference in August 1945 whether Hitler was dead. Stalin reportedly simply said no. So Stalin became obsessed by the notion that Hitler might be alive somewhere, and if so, might rally Germany against Russia once more. So to find out the truth, at the end of 1945, he ordered the NKVD, which would eventually become the KGB, to investigate the possibility of Hitler's survival. The NKVD interrogated captured German personnel and combed records, piecing together the story of what had happened to Hitler. This project became known as Operation Myth. The investigation went well because the Soviet Union had captured the German Reich Chancellery as well as Hitler's bunker in Berlin. And in addition to this, they had confiscated documents from Hitler's headquarters and living quarters. The Soviets had even apprehended much of the staff that had served the German leader, including Heinz Linge, Hitler's personal assistant and valet, and Otto Gunch, the SS adjutant to Hitler. This questioning was grueling and often bordered on torture. Now, Operation Myth was ongoing for nearly 4 years, creating a snapshot of all of Hitler's movements from 1933 until he vanished in 1945. The final report was completed in 1949 and consisted of 413 typed pages. Following the fall of the USSR, the West gained access to many Soviet documents, but failed to discover Stalin's report about Hitler until 2005 because it had been filed away as document number 462A. Now, it appears one of the complicating factors was that Hitler had body doubles to confuse possible spies as well as help reduce the chance of assassination because several attempts on his life had been made during World War II. And let me turn screen share back on because there's a picture here that'll help bring some of this into focus. No pun intended. That was just how I was going to say it until I read the caption. But one of the out of focus photos offered by the USSR as proof of Hitler's death. So you can tell even though this is a low res PDF, but you can tell even just by the standards that they had during the day, this is still incredibly blurry. They had clear pictures available. So I get, it kind of looks like him, but is it really? You would think that for proof of something of that magnitude, they would offer a clearer photo. Now, consequently, officers of the Soviet army may have thought they'd found Hitler's remains, only to later discover the corpse was that of one of Hitler's doubles, Gustav Weller. If so, this likely did little to placate Stalin's fears that Hitler might still be alive. That a body double died at the end of World War II instead of Hitler himself also explains some of the conflicting information in the Soviet autopsy of the body they would later claim was Hitler's. Historian Peter Fotis Kapnista wrote, I'm not really good with German names, so I'm going to do my best. But let me put screen share back on so you can see this quote and this picture that goes along with it. All right. I think there's supposed to be a space here. So historian Peter Fotis Kapnistos wrote. Yeah, again, I'm really bad with like German names and words, so I'm not a scholar in those regards. So I'll do my best, but to actually have the accurate names and all that, you should get the book. But here's the quote: first published in 1968, "The Death of Adolf Hitler: Unknown Documents from Soviet Archives" by journalist Lev Bezimensky, was the means by which the Soviet Union chose to inform the world of the findings of the Russian medical team that performed the autopsy on Hitler's corpse in 1945. So here's a picture: Hitler with generals in German-occupied Ukraine, 1942, photo courtesy of German Federal Archive. All right. Continuing on with the quote, notable among the Soviet autopsy findings was the claim that Adolf Hitler was missing a testicle. The autopsy reports noted that part of Hitler's cranium was missing, and there were reservations and cloudy remarks. Quite puzzling was the claim that Adolf Hitler was missing a testicle. None of the doctors that examined Hitler had ever reported on the rather conspicuous condition of monarchism. Observers also cast doubt on why a piece of Hitler's cranium was reported missing. It was the segment supposedly providing evidence that there was no bullet hole in Hitler's skull, i.e. his death was by cyanic compounds. Still, the most confusing fact was that Soviet leader Joseph Stalin often claimed the Fuhrer had escaped the Berlin bunker with the help of British military intelligence. If Stalin knew that Hitler's burned body had been found, why did he go on spreading reports of the Fuhrer's escape? All right. So Now, DNA tests performed in 2009 actually found that the skull the Russians claimed was that of Hitler was actually that of a human female, making it impossible that it could have been the German leader. So, as noted, researcher Jason Offutt wrote, Nick Bellantoni of the University of Connecticut conducted DNA tests on the remains in 2009 and concluded the jawbone and skull stored in Moscow were those of a woman between the ages of 20 and 40. Braun was 33 and Hitler, presumably not a woman, had just turned 56. Although the skull matched Braun's age and sex, it showed a bullet wound, and according to eyewitnesses, Braun had not been shot. Now, even though both the Soviet Union and the U.S. Government claimed that Hitler had killed himself when Berlin was being invaded by Russian troops, and the Russians claimed to have found Hitler's body. In fact, there's no evidence that any of this was true. Worse, it now appears that both governments actually lied about the facts to make their citizens believe Hitler was dead when the evidence suggested otherwise. It seems likely that the body found in Hitler's bunker wasn't the leader himself, but one of the doubles he had to make it harder for assassins to kill Hitler. Or possibly the Soviets fabricated his death from the get-go, using a skull they found in the battlefield without realizing it was female rather than male. Even if the Russians made an honest mistake thinking the double was Hitler, given Stalin's paranoia and erratic behavior, it isn't hard to imagine that the fiction of Hitler's death might have continued long after the discovery that a mistake had been made, simply to save face. Now, it also seems that the U.S. was uncertain whether or not Hitler was dead. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower famously admitted, and this is a direct quote, "We have been unable to unearth one bit of tangible evidence of Hitler's death. Many people believe that Hitler escaped from Berlin." Now, the FBI actually conducted investigations that searched for the German leader for years following World War II. In regard to files that the public now has access to, the FBI notes, the documents in this file range from 1933 to 1947, but primarily fall either in 1933 or between 1945 and 1947. In 1933, the FBI investigated an assassination threat made against Hitler. In the aftermath of Germany's surrender in 1945, Western Allied forces suspected that Hitler had committed suicide but did not immediately find evidence of his death. At the time, it was feared that Hitler may have escaped in the closing days of the war, and searches were made to determine if he was still alive. FBI files indicate that the Bureau investigated some of the rumors of Hitler's survival. So let me turn screen share on because there's a document here that you should take a look at. And again, some of this is going to be hard to read over a PDF and a video like this, but if you get the book, it's actually in really, really clear detail. So this document here, the FBI followed a number of leads in an effort to capture Hitler after he escaped to Germany before the Nazis surrendered, courtesy of the FBI. So here's that document there. So that's really interesting. Okay. So basically, immediately following World War II, the U.S. government also wasn't convinced that Hitler was dead. And historian Jason Offutt recently noted, and here's a direct quote from him, and this comes from reports of Hitler's death were wildly exaggerated or something. Mysterious Universe, February 25th, 2014, so if you want to look that up. But it says, for decades, rumors have persisted that Adolf Hitler escaped Germany in the final days of war. A recent book by best-selling author Jerome Corsi, Hunting Hitler, claims the United States government helped the German leader escape. In the 2011 book Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, authors Simon Dunstan and Gerard Williams say Hitler and Braun's suicides were faked, and the newly married couple left the Führer bunker, made it to a runway, and left Germany on a Junkers 52 transport aircraft. According to one FBI informant, he was one of 4 men who met Hitler and a group of nearly 50 people, including 2 women and a doctor, when 2 German submarines stopped along the tip of the Valdez Peninsula, which is in the Gulf of San Martius, at 11 p.m. one night about 2.5 weeks after the fall of Berlin. It took until dawn to unload the submarines and strap the group's possessions to pack horses. The FBI source said the plans had been arranged by the German government and 6 top Argentine officials. The group was led inland toward the foothills of the southern Andes, where they arrived at the ranch of a German family at dusk. End quote. So if Hitler escaped, one might assume he would have escaped with so few assets that he could never do more than hide in some obscure part of the world, looking over his shoulder, wondering when he might be caught. But that might not have been the case at all. History now tells us that German industrialists, as well as Hitler, devised a devious plan that enabled them to retain valuable assets, even as they appeared to lose World War II. This industrial base and its assets might very well have laid the groundwork for a system that could funnel vast amounts of money into various Nazi undertakings following the fall of Berlin. So there might be some truth behind the fiction. Many news reporters speculated that Hitler might have escaped being captured by the Allies at the close of the war. The U.S. press regularly hypothesized about what might have happened to Hitler. However, one news source, and a rather surprising one at that, actually dared to dig and find some hard truths that the others ignored or even were afraid to talk about. Possibly this publication got away with telling the truth because much of the world wrote it off as the fanciful ranting of a religious cult. No doubt its lack of advertising made it hard to exert pressure on it, as might be done with other publications. But at any rate, some of the most revealing stories were run by The Plain Truth, a free monthly magazine published by Herbert W. Armstrong's Radio Church of God, a.k.a. the Worldwide Church of God. Now, this magazine was no small endeavor, being translated into a number of languages, with a circulation at its peak exceeding that of the Time magazine. The Plain Truth ran a number of articles that speculated as to whether or not Hitler had actually died at the end of World War II. For example, in the September 1948 issue, a front page article speculated, and let me switch screen share back on so you can see this quote with me. So the front page article speculated here, is Adolf Hitler still alive, or did he die in those closing days of World War II in the siege of Berlin? For 3 years, this question has excited the curiosity of the world. The picture given the world in these published reports is that of a Hitler, we'll come back to that picture, Hitler completely shot to pieces, a physical and mental wreck. Well, isn't that exactly what Hitler would wish us to believe if he had planned in advance for his own escape? This lends credibility to the entire story, leads us to think Hitler was through anyway, throws us completely off the track. This picture here, this is a painting of the multi-headed beast from the AHNENERBE Bible circa 1530. So keep that in your mind, because we'll be coming back to that. But to continue on the quote, Hitler boasted constantly he would rule the world 1,000 years. Remember, prophecy says that this next and last head of the beast is to be resurrected, will perform miracles, or by deception pretend to. Now, what is the greatest miracle Almighty God has ever performed on earth? I say the greatest miracle is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, Hitler failed in his first attempt to establish his millennium. He did plan, we know, for a resurrection of his Nazi plan from its present secret underground activities. And what a masterpiece of a satanic counterfeit miracle it would be to produce, perhaps 6 or 7 years from now, Adolf Hitler, whom the world has proved dead by all this documentary evidence, and Adolf Hitler, who would claim he was resurrected from the dead as a savior of the German people, and not only resurrected as a counterfeit of the resurrection of Christ, but also returned in a second coming to set up the world rule by and through the Nazis to rule the world for the next 1,000 years. We know there is today a Hitler-planned underground actually functioning in the world, and it is not all in Germany either. Some of its key members are in South America. I personally saw 1 or 2 in Switzerland last year, apparently living in luxury and ease with plenty of money. They are today carrying out Hitler's plan for a resurrected Nazi Europe. Okay, so this article does raise some interesting questions, as well as linking the possibility that a future Hitler-like leader might well become the Antichrist of the Bible, attempting to usurp the throne of Jesus, hoodwinking our planet's population by appearing to come back from the dead. Now, during World War II, many Christians believed Hitler might be the Antichrist due to his messianic-like leadership of the German people, as well as his war against the Jews portrayed in the Bible as God's chosen people. Now, as theologian Peter Goodgame noted today, we know there are many other features about Hitler that lend themselves to seeing him as a satanic leader. So here is a... Let me see here. Here's a quote, and kind of a long one, but let me see. 37. I'm just trying to find where this comes from. Okay, The Second Coming of the Antichrist by Peter Goodgame. All right. So I will turn screen share back on because there's quite a few pictures along the way as well. Okay, so this is Dietrich Eckart, drawing by Karl Bauer, but here's the quote. The answer to what drove Hitler can be found by examining Hitler's relationship with the occult and his involvement in the dark arts of sorcery and spirit possession. The author is qualified to explore this relationship because he is the late Gerald Suster, a former disciple of Golden Dawn adept Israel Regardie, who was himself the personal disciple and secretary of Aleister Crowley. Suster's biography is entitled Hitler, Black Magician, and it documents Hitler's involvement with groups and individuals who used pagan rituals to contact the spirit world. One of Hitler's closest friends was a man by the name of Dietrich Eckart, and he is a primary figure, according to Suster. Peter Levenda and Trevor Ravenscroft involved in grooming Hitler for his satanic role. Hitler certainly exhibited the personal characteristics of a satanically driven and possessed individual, and his passionate hatred of the Jews is well documented. Unfortunately, the Christian church in Germany was too timid and too deceived to challenge Hitler directly, but there were many individual Christians who did, such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who paid for his dedication to Christ with his life. Despite the fact that the organized church in Germany worked with the Nazi Party, Hitler's ultimate goal was to destroy Christianity. Suster offers the following quotes from Hitler to that effect. The religions are all alike, no matter what they call themselves. They have no future, certainly none for the Germans, whether it is the Old Testament or the New. It's all the same old Jewish swindle. One is either a German or a Christian. And here's many German Christians believe the Nazis would be a good moral influence. Shown here are members of the German Christians organization celebrating Luther Day in Berlin, 1933. Photo courtesy of German Federal Archive. Continuing on with the quote, you cannot be both. We need free men who feel and know that God is in themselves. The Ten Commandments have lost their validity. Our peasants have not forgotten their true religion. It still lives. The peasant will be told what the church has destroyed for him, the whole secret knowledge of nature, of the divine, the shapeless, the demonic. We shall wash off the Christian veneer and bring out a religion peculiar to our race, though through the peasantry we shall really be able to destroy Christianity because there is in them a true religion rooted in nature and blood. And then here's a picture. Christians like Dietrich Bonhoeffer here in 1939 lost their lives due to their opposition to the Nazis. Okay. Now, many argue that Hitler could not have been the Antichrist because he eventually died. Christianity remains viable, and Jesus has not returned to rule our planet, as he will in the end times. Now, this all changes if Hitler escaped when Germany fell, or if his genetic makeup can be resurrected through cloning or some other process like that. At that point, the theory of Hitler as the Antichrist again becomes a terrifying, viable theory. Now, is there any possibility that Hitler didn't die at the end of World War II, or that he might be cloned to create a new young Hitler? And surprisingly enough, there is much possibility in the technology to clone him from a single cell from a hair or other tissue is also a viable reality as well. It's just the world that we live in. Next, we're going to talk about NEUSCHWABENLAND, but before we do, I want to jump in the chat and see how everybody's doing, see if anybody has any questions. What do you guys think? Is Hitler alive or is he dead? Well, I would assume even if he did survive, he's probably dead by now. Let's see, at the time of his death, his supposed death, he was about 53. So yeah, he would likely be gone either way now. But what do you guys think about all this? Do you think that he escaped? Do you think that he died as the story as history tells us, or do you think something else is going on here? So we got a lot of people in the chat room. It's great to see everybody. Hello, Polenta and Lynn, Bill, Dylan, Pax again, Will Redding. Great to see you guys again. And Jackie says that she believes that Hitler has escaped. Before looking into this myself, through Steve's work here, I would have said, well, I don't know if there's any evidence to say that he escaped, but I'm starting to see that there is good reason to believe that, and I'm wondering the same thing. Did he really escape? So this is an exciting book for me because this is a topic I've been interested in for a while now. So it's cool to see that this research is done in a book like this. So yeah, it's great to see everybody here. Let's see. Martin says, hello, Josh. Hello. Baker says, hey, Josh. Hey, Baker, or N. Baker, I should say. What's up, Georgia? And Karen, J.R. Foster. Lots of people. Great to see all of you. Martin says, possibly escaped. I think that's a good way to handle it. I think it's possible as well. Let's see. Martin also says, I have heard that there is an antichrist raised by Satan in every age just in case. I believe that too, because if you look at every generation, there was some type of figure that could play that role if those were going to be the end times. I believe that the enemy does know prophecy, but may not know exactly when prophecy is going to happen. So, the enemy has always been prepared. And there is an antichrist spirit in the world and has been for at least 2,000 years, but we could go back to the book of Genesis and even see it there. So there's always this spirit of Antichrist around, and it does find embodiment in one person or another throughout history. So I agree with you there. Corey says Argentina. He believes that Hitler has fled to Argentina, and that's a possibility as well. And that's something that we're going to be looking into in as we go along in this book. So it's really good to see all of you here. Let's see. Will says, can't say for sure if Hitler escaped, but many of his influenced and influencers surely escaped. Yeah, absolutely. And even some of them were brought here to the U.S. in Operation Paperclip. So, yeah, good point. Lobby Dove says Hitler likely cryogenic in Antarctica, Uberman transhumanist plan. Very well could be. We're going to explore some of those possibilities. All right. Great to see you all active in the chat room. That is awesome. As we continue on here, let's talk about NEUSCHWABENLAND, and this is a really interesting part of the book and sets the stage for a lot of what we're going to be looking at in the future. Now, again, if you haven't had the chance, or if you're just joining us, go ahead and subscribe. And also, if you want to get the book, there are links in the description below, and you can check out Steve Quayle's other works as well. So that'll be interesting, and we'll get Steve on a little later to talk about his book. That'll be fun. Okay, so continuing on with the historically fictional narrative that's based on research, I'll turn screen share back on so you can follow along. You can follow the story along with me. Again, if you're just joining us, Steve starts every chapter in this manner, which keeps it kind of interesting. And based on his research, this is how he could see these scenes playing out. Admiral Donitz had been full of apprehension the whole trip. It had been close from the start, with Der Fuhrer and his entourage barely making it to the docks in time for the XX-1 or 21 U-boat to leave harbor, just minutes before Allied bombers pounded the docks to dust. The captain knew he couldn't relax just yet. In fact, the trickiest part of the voyage remained: entering the underwater Biber Dam entrance to Station 211. What's our sounding? Donitz asked. We have 50 fathoms under our keel, his navigator answered. Good, Donitz said. No danger of running aground, at least. Let's look topside just to be safe. but he worried about damaging one of the hydroplanes by hitting the ice as they neared their entrance. Sonar had told him it was clear, but he preferred to see with his own eyes before giving the order to surface. Dunnett stepped up to the periscope pedestal, up scope. A petty officer switched the hydraulic ring control. The search periscope lifted smoothly from its well with a whiff of machine oil. The German officer waited until it was well above the surface of the water. Hold. He stepped to the conning station, swiveled his hat around, and placed his eyes to the viewer. He blinked at the sunlit shades of blue and white where the light refracted through the ice and water. Beautiful. After his eye had adjusted to the dazzling light, he paced the scope through a full circle. Looks clear all around, he told his men. Take a look, he ordered his executive officer. The sailor, his eye to the periscope, made another circuit of the sea and nodded. I concur, Captain. Scope down, Donitz ordered. Does sonar show any icebergs close to us? The engineering officer checked. Still nothing, Captain. Only the ice wall is dead ahead. Radio beacon, Donitz asked. Loud and clear. Let's follow it in then, Donitz said. He ordered them down to the depth needed to enter Biber Dam, then ordered the submarine forward. Soon they would enter the underwater entrance to NEUSCHWABENLAND. After that, they'd know whether it was the Shangri-La for those who visited the colony claimed it to be. Okay. So that sets the stage for what we're looking at, Antarctic expeditions. Now, Antarctica lies at the geographic south pole of our planet, with most of its landmass covered by ice of varying depths. The landmass comprises some 5.4 million square miles, making it the fifth largest continent. Myths about a land known as Terra Australis, the southern land, stretch far back into antiquity, with mapmakers starting to jot in such a place as early as the late 1500s. The ancient predictions that a landmass would be where Antarctica is were made based on the theory that landmasses had to balance each other around the globe. Since the preponderance of known lands was north of the equator, it was therefore assumed a large mass of land must be farther south to counterbalance it. Now, in the early 1800s, British explorer Matthew Flinders insisted that the newly found continent Australia be given that name because there was no probability of any significant landmass being south of that point. Ironically, just a few decades after Flinders made his pronouncement, land was discovered south of Australia that would become the Antarctica rather than the Terra Australis that appeared in the old maps. Now, how did Germany manage to create its secret base in Antarctica, we might ask, and how could they amass the weapons and personnel in Antarctica to overcome Byrd and his forces? Now, at first glance, such a feat would seem impossible. However, the Nazis had a number of aces up their sleeves. One of the surprises was that they'd been at the task for a very long time. Like many other industrialized nations, Germany had sent expeditions to Antarctica in the 1800s, mapping the shores of the icy continent and even journeying inland from time to time. NEUSCHWABENLAND is the name German explorers gave to an area of Antarctica between 20 degrees east and 10 degrees west in Queen Maud Land. Currently, at least in theory, it's administered as a Norwegian-dependent territory under the Antarctic Treaty System. The region was extensively explored and apparently named in the 1930s. Its name apparently comes from the MS Schwabenland, which was involved in the explorations, and which in turn was named after the German Swabia or Swabia region. Now, as historian Bill Yen noted, here, let me turn screen share on so you can follow this quote along with me. Okay, so historian, there we go, historian Bill Yen noted, and here's this is German NEUSCHWABENLAND expedition patch right here, and actually up here's another picture. This is a Nazi crew headed for Antarctic exploration during 1938 and 1939. Photo courtesy of German Federal Archive. Okay. So here's the quote. Equipped with swastika flags to raise over polar ice, the team under the command of Kriegsmarine Captain Alfred Rilscher departed from Hamburg in December 1938 aboard the research ship Schwabenland. The ship's name was no coincidence, as it was the intention of the Third Reich to claim sovereignty over a 230,000 square mile slice of the ice continent and name it New Schwabenland or New Swabia. Old Swabia or Schwabenland is that part of Germany that roughly corresponds to the modern state of I don't know how to pronounce that. So you can just see right there, BADCNWURTTCM Berg. Okay, so continuing on, this assertion raised diplomatic eyebrows, especially in Norway, because Richter and his crew staked out a part of Norway's previously claimed Queen Maud Land region. In the United States, the event was reported on page 11 of the New York Times on April 13th, 1939, where the narrative read, "Judging from the claims advanced in the press, Great Germany has just staked out her first colony outside Europe and is proposing to take possession." By the summer of 1939, the world was increasingly edgy about German territorial claims, and the U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt went so far as to order Admiral Byrd to take an American expedition south. The headline in the New York Times on July 8, 1939 read, Germany's moves in Antarctica spur action to validate our territorial claims there. Admiral Byrd says area is rich in natural resources." The article went on to say, President Roosevelt moved today to prevent possible extension of Germany's claims to Antarctic areas in the Western Hemisphere by directing Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd to leave early in October on another South Polar expedition. A week later, on July 14th, the New York Times reported Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, disclosing plans for his coming expedition in the Antarctic, said today that 6 Army tanks and a unique 45,000-pound snow cruiser would be used for transport over the South Pole's icy wastelands. Here's a picture: Nazi team planting flag at Antarctic in 1939, photo courtesy of German Federal Archive. But because of World War II, Byrd's expedition never happened. During the war, German naval activity in the South Atlantic and the Antarctic continued. Both U-boats and surface warships did battle with the British Navy there, and Germans were also active in Australian waters. As Walter Sullivan wrote in an article on Antarctica in the New York Times on March 9, 1955, disguised German raiders attacked Allied shipping there in World War II. Rumors of a secret German base in Antarctica persisted after the war, and today there are a vast array of Nazis in the Antarctic stories alive. These stories range from interaction between the Germans and other worldly beings to Hitler's having taken up residence in New Schwabenland after the war. Okay, so during the time leading up to World War II, Germany was mounting expeditions that were allegedly to increase whaling in the region, whale oil being employed to create soap and margarine in Germany that was pressed for raw materials during the war. However, given that Germany might just as easily have purchased these materials from Norway, some historians suspect that the German Navy was actually setting up secret submarine bases in the region, a point of key importance when it came to Nazi plans to eventually win the war. So here's a map where you can actually see where this area is located. Right here, where you see this arrow, New Swabia, and this is the Queen Maud Land. So New Schwabenland lies on the Atlantic off Africa, labeled as New Swabia in this map by Thomas Blomberg. And that, of course, is Antarctica. South Pole's right there. So that's the area that we're talking about. Now, additionally, the Americans weren't treating the Nazi activities in Antarctica as something innocent. In 1939, President Roosevelt tasked none other than Admiral Byrd to go to the region and find out what was going on there. Now, here's part of the story that appeared in many U.S. newspapers at that time, and this is a direct quote from President Direct Speeds on Byrd's Trip, New York Times, July 8th, 1939. Which reads, President Roosevelt moved today to prevent possible extension of Germany's claims to Antarctic areas in the Western Hemisphere by directing Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd to leave in October to territory within the sphere of influence of the Monroe Doctrine. This government was prepared to take the position, if necessary, that any attempts by foreign powers to establish bases west of the 180th meridian in the Antarctic would be considered an unfriendly act. If the $340,000 appropriated by Congress for the expedition permitted, Admiral Byrd said he would outfit 3 ships. His own ship would be the Bear of Oakland, which is undergoing a careful inspection at Boston. He said he would lend it to the government after a new engine had been installed. End quote. So obviously leaders in the U.S. were concerned with what the Germans were doing in Antarctica. The expedition was only called off because the U.S. entered World War II. Now, although skeptical that the Germans had managed to set up a secret base in Antarctica, historians Colin Summerhays and Peter Beeching summed up the possibilities of what happened after World War II in the Antarctic in this way. This is a quote. In January through February 1939, a secret German expedition visited Droning, or Queen Maud Land, aka NEUSCHWABENLAND, Antarctica, apparently with the intention of establishing a base there. Between 1943 and 1945, the British launched a secret wartime Antarctic operation codenamed Tabarin. Men from the Special Air Services Regiment, SAS, Britain's covert forces for operating behind the lines, appeared to be involved. In July and August 1945, after the German surrender, 2 U-boats arrived in Argentina. Had they been to Antarctica to land Nazi treasure or officials? In the southern summer of 1946 through 1947, the U.S. Navy appeared to invade Antarctica using a large force. The operation, codenamed High Jump, was classified confidential. End quote. So the question, why would a science mission become classified? It's hard to imagine why this would be done unless it was actually something else entirely and events occurred which had to be kept from the American people. Now, in other words, the notion that Operation High Jump met overwhelming resistance from Germans in Antarctica fits perfectly with the facts. And meanwhile, NEUSCHWABENLAND appears to be off limits to many, and parts of it have even been missing from the satellite photos of Antarctica released by NASA. For example, in creating a composite orthographic projection map of the continent from NASA's Blue Marble satellite photos, the researcher Dave Pape, Associate Professor, Department of Media Study, University at Buffalo, noted, and here's a quote, "This image has been manually modified to fill in an area of black pixels in the ocean in the upper right quadrant. The black pixels are presumed to be due to missing data in the land/sea mask used in making the original Blue Marble image." So that upper right quadrant is part of the area where NEUSCHWABENLAND actually lies. Perhaps those photos were simply missing from the data set, yet one is left to wonder, or left with the distinct possibility that they might have been removed because they would reveal buildings or other artifacts created by Nazis living there, and that the data may have been tampered with opens the possibilities that other photos might have been doctored to hide underground openings on the surface of the continent or other structures. Now, while this is speculation, it's nevertheless intriguing in its implications. And that leads us to the AHNENERBE. And I actually want to show you this inscription here, or insignia thing. The AHNENERBE insignia, and this is a drawing by Krzysztof Zakowski. Okay, so keep that in mind because we're going to be talking about the AHNENERBE next. We'll actually just get right into it. Now, to fully understand how the Nazis could establish an outpost in Antarctica, it's necessary to know a little about a group known as the AHNENERBE, or German for Ancestral Heritage, that had been formed by Hitler. Now, the group was headed by SS Colonel Wolfram von Sievers, who handled the operations and paperwork of the organization with one of Hitler's right-hand men, Heinrich Himmler, apparently the power behind the throne within the organization. Now, we'll get into greater detail later as to what all the Ahnenerbe was involved in during the war, including occult practices and research into the supernatural, but suffice to say, they discovered a variety of unusual weapons and powers that eventually enabled the creation of a variety of unusual flying machines, including several types that are often called flying saucers or UFOs. Now, historic books generally claim that following the collapse of German forces as Allied forces advanced through Europe, the majority of the Ahnenerbe, as well as members of the SS, were captured. Sadly, this is incorrect. Most of the Ahnenerbe managed to disappear without leaving a trace in Germany. And you can actually look at Voice of Destruction by Hermann Rausching by Pelican Publishing from April 2003 for more information on that. And as we'll get into later, it appears likely that many continued their work while in hiding. Now, the question one might ask then is, what exactly have the Ahnenerbe been doing since World War II, and where might they be hiding? Now, since World War II, there have been persistent rumors that the Nazis have created at least a few operational UFOs, which they transported to their Antarctic base. Now, these suppositions have been bolstered by a statement U.S. Admiral Richard Byrd apparently made during his return from his expedition to Antarctica in 1947. Now, his trip to Antarctica was part of Operation High Jump, which Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal had created. And we went into Operation High Jump in a previous video. So if you're interested in that, you can just look up Steve Quayle Operation High Jump. You'll find the video on this channel, so make sure to subscribe. Now, one stated mission for the task force was to collect scientific information. As noted earlier, this seems unlikely given the lack of scientists included in the operation. And the other stated mission was that the group was being sent to discover coal deposits in the barren wasteland around the South Pole. Now, on its face, this reason for such a massive expedition doesn't hold up very well. Mining coal in the icy cold of the Antarctic and then transporting it to the shores for transport via ships would be a doubtful proposition at best. This purpose also has all the earmarks of the proverbial government cover story. So why did the Naval Task Force which included Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Cruson, and Admiral Byrd, head to the Antarctica? What was the real purpose of Operation High Jump? The persistent rumors through the decades since then have been that the expedition was looking for the German submarine base, which had been designated Neuschwabenland, and which, as we mentioned earlier, had been established by German U-boats at the closing of World War II. But was there such a base? In fact, there was such an empire beneath the ice of Antarctica. So one of the first-hand encounters with the Nazis in the Antarctic, and one that predated Operation High Jump, took place during World War II, most likely where the Nazis were still building their secret Antarctic base. Historian Nigel Graydon gives us this account of the encounter. Let me see how long this is, and there's a picture. So let's turn screen share on so you can follow the quote along with me. And there are pictures to come. And here's the source, Nigel Graydon, The Mystery of U-33, Hitler's Secret Envoy, SCB Distributors 2011, Chapter 14. All right, so here's the quote. James Robert, World War II historian and writer, interviewed an unnamed British wartime SAS officer described by Robert as the last survivor of the Neuschwabenland campaign. According to Robert, Antarctica was Britain's secret war. In the summer of 1944, British scientists and commandos had found an ancient tunnel. Under orders, the 30-strong force went through the tunnel, but only 2 returned before the Antarctic winter set in. During the winter months, the 2 survivors made absurd claims over the radio about polar men, ancient tunnels, and Nazis. Radio contact was finally lost in July 1945. The last broadcast concluded abruptly with an anguished scream, "The polar men have found me." Against this macabre backdrop, the mission took place. The SAS team found 1 survivor. Under questioning, the surviving soldier described finding a tunnel which led to a vast, abnormally warm underground cavern filled with lakes. Startlingly, the cavern was lit artificially. Investigation showed that the Nazis had constructed a huge base inside the caverns and had even built docks for U-boats. The survivor reported that hangars for strange planes and excavations galore had been documented. The British exploration team had been spotted and all executed except for the survivor. The survivor said that the polar men were a product of Nazi science, although the SAS veteran's account does not elaborate on how he arrived at this conclusion. The team captured and killed one of the polar men, and the mission scientists declared that he was human, but it seemed he had been able to produce more hair and withstand the cold far more effectively. The survivor went on to say the Nazis' power source was volcanic, which gave them heat for steam and also helped to produce electricity. Here's a picture, a type VIIC or 11C U-boat, U-995 on display in Norway, and photo by Magnus Mansky. Okay, 9 SAS commandos entered the tunnel, eventually reaching the vast lit cavern. From their place of concealment, they were astounded to see a great number of people scurrying ant-like around the cavern. They were also confronted by a staggering scale of construction activity. On their return to South Georgia, the mission team was ordered never to reveal what it had seen, heard, or encountered. The tunnel was explained away as a glacial erosion. The polar men were merely unkempt soldiers that had gone crazy. Okay, now if this account is to be believed, and of course a lot of historians have done their best to hide or obscure it from public view or dismiss it outright when it appears in print or on the internet, then it would appear that the Germans had a massive building project in place during the war, supplying it with manpower and supplies to create a fortress that could be used as a base of operations. Now, Nigel Graden also noted that German activity in the Antarctic continued after the war. He wrote, here's another quote for you. All right, he wrote, and it's the same source, as you can see down here. So he wrote, stories about U-boat activity in the area continued for many years after the war. A French news agency reported in September 1946 that the continuous rumors about German U-boat activity in the region of Tierra del Fuego, between the southernmost tip of Latin America and the continent of Antarctica, are based on true happenings. French Sawyer then published an account describing the Icelandic whaler Juliana's purported encounter 18 months after the cessation of hostilities. The Juliana was in the Antarctic region around the Malvinas Islands, or today the Falklands, when a large German submarine surfaced and raised the German official flag. The submarine commander sent out a boarding party, which approached the Juliana in a rubber dinghy. The boarding party demanded of the whaler's Captain Hecla part of his fresh food stocks. The German officer spoke correct English and paid for his provisions in US dollars, giving Hecla a bonus of $10 for each member of the Juliana's crew. Author Wilhelm Landig claimed that it was not just in Antarctica that Nazi strongholds were established. During World War II, Landig held a senior position in the Central Nazi Archive in Berlin, where information from all around the world came in for analysis and filing. In 1971, Landig published Kampf gegen Thule, Battle Against Thule, later republished as Götzen gegen Thule, or Godless Against Thule, claiming that his book was not a work of fiction, but one based on facts that his higher-ups had given him leave to publish. Stylizing himself thus as a man in the know, Landig writes extensively in Götzen gegen Thule about the Nazis' polar bases. These included the Canadian Arctic, the Alps on the Argentine-Chilean border, reportedly named Colonia Dignidad, and a base in eastern Greenland called by the German Beaver Dam, which Landig said was accessed via U-boat through underwater tunnels. This method of U-boat access was also described for the base at NEUSCHWABENLAND. In fact, this type of entrance was actually built, and an example can be seen at the German base in the inland of Fuerteventura in the Canary Islands. Steven Spielberg is said to have got the idea for the submarine base seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark from the Beaver Dam facility, which Sonic researchers claim was a secret joint Nazi-NATO base until well after the war. So here's a picture. You can see the massive entrance to a Nazi submarine pen on Vis, Croatia. Sometimes these entrances were underwater for added concealment from Allied bombers. Photo courtesy of Vojny Popka Parya V. Okay, so Landig also provides a dramatic description of the Ark of the Covenant as an ancient day weapon of mass destruction wielded by Israeli sorcerers against the first pre-flood Aryans. Sensational images brought to cinematic life in the final island scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when archaeologist Rene Belloc, an ill-deserved synonym for Grail historian Otto Rahn, that's interesting, and his Nazi cohorts are incinerated by the light of God released from the Ark. Tales also circulated from time to time about U-boats destined for Antarctica bearing strange cargoes, transported to Neuschwabenland for use in futuristic Nazi technologies, including advanced fuel systems. All right, so in the late 1980s, author Dr. Howard A. Buechner, MD, who served as professor of medicine at Tulane and later LSU, co-authored a book with German captain W. Bernhardt, possibly a pseudonym, who had been on missions to the German colony at Neuschwabenland via German U-boats. Now, according to Buechner and Bernhardt, the original part of the Nazi stronghold was formed from a natural ice cave that had been discovered in the Mühlhig-Hoffmann Mountains by the Richter expedition, of 1938 through 1939, with the entrance being reinforced with steel walls and stairs by a later expedition in 1943. By 1940, submarines were bringing in vast stores of food, clothing, fuel, and every other conceivable item necessary for setting up Hitler's refuge. Construction materials, tractors, arms, distillation apparatus, machinery, radio equipment, personnel, engineers, and scientists were included. During the next 4 years, shelters were built and a mountain was scooped out. In 1943, in what appears to have been a veiled reference to Neuschwabenland, German Admiral Karl Donitz announced that Germany had created a Station 211, which the German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the Fuhrer in another part of the world, a Shangri-La on land, an impregnable fortress. That's a direct quote. U.S. interrogation of the captured crews of German U-boats U-530 and U-977 in 1945 led to the discovery that the Nazis had a stronghold in Antarctica, and that knowledge caused the U.S. government to organize Operation High Jump specifically to locate and destroy this ancient base. Although the U.S. government would later hide the fact, many of Byrd's men were lost during Operation High Jump, and at least 4 U.S. aircraft disappeared during encounters with strange aircraft. And this comes from Hitler's Ashes by H.A. Buechner and W. Bernhardt, if you want to check that out. It's from 1989, specifically pages 154, 156, 188, 229, and 231. Now, perhaps the most interesting point about Neuschwabenland is the area it occupies is off limits for all but a select few. The reason is that it supposedly is an area where rare species live and must therefore be protected from human intrusion. Now, this, of course, seems like an odd coincidence to those who believe that the Germans may still have a thriving colony there. Now, certainly the Nazis expended enough time and resources to establish such a colony. As German historian Ursula Seiler noted, here, you know what? I'm going to put on, I'll put on screen share so you can follow this quote with me. Okay, so this is Ursula Seiler, Mysterious Antarctica, Facts Are Facts magazine. You can check it out, factsarefacts.com. with dashes in between the words. But after the Schwabenland expedition returned home to Germany in early 1939, continuing orders were issued to Karl von Donitz, Supreme Commander of the U-boat fleet. An increasing frequency of German U-boats began setting off in the direction of the South Pole from that point on in order to carry out missions that remain a secret even now. In early 1939, after its successful expedition, the ship Schwabenland began a commuter service between Germany and the South Pole continent, whereby they not only transported the most modern mining engineering, trolleys, rails, and gigantic tunneling presses, but also brought in scientists from different fields, engineers, and highly skilled workers. Here's a picture of the German ship Schwabenland, appears to have transferred personnel and supplies on a regular basis between Germany and the South Pole during the late 1930s and early 1940s. Photo courtesy of German Federal Archive. So you can see the name there, Schwabenland. And again, if you get the book, you'll be able to see these pictures in a lot higher definition than what can be provided here. Okay, so after 1942, the systematic relocation of German scientists, important skilled personnel, and members of the NSDAP to NEUSCHWABENLAND had begun. This is the reason why numerous specialists and scientists who the Americans had hoped to obtain for their own military research endeavors suddenly disappeared after the war without a trace. It is also the case that the fate and whereabouts of at least 100 German U-boats are still unknown to this day. Now, the evidence suggests that Hitler and his followers used extensive time and resources to create a huge empire under the ice in Antarctica, and all indications are that it has continued to thrive since then. So Hitler's super U-boats. German Unterseeboot, or undersea boat, or U-boat for short, were made in a variety of styles. Most movies and stories involved the smaller versions of the German submarines. However, by the end of the war, the Germans fielded some massive submarines. Additionally, Nazi factories developed modular building methods that allowed rapid assembly of U-boats so that it was impossible for the Allies to keep track of how many there were or how many had been launched. The armistice at the end of World War I required Germany to surrender all its U-boats, and the Treaty of Versailles that followed outlawed German construction of submarines. Now, in 1935, though, Hitler threw this agreement into the shredder, and construction of U-boats resumed. When World War II began, U-boats tended to operate alone, attacking ships in the same manner they had during World War I. However, the Allies developed countermeasures, including sub-hunting aircraft and putting ships into convoys where they could be protected by battleships and submarine destroyers. So to overcome these tactics, the German submarines started operating in wolf packs, with scout subs locating convoys, radioing the location to other U-boats, and then assembling a group of subs to attack the convoy at night. As the convoys developed more sophisticated methods of defending themselves, including radar that could spot U-boats, periscopes, or subs surfacing to fire artillery, the U-boats started operating at greater distances from Europe in an effort to attack ships that weren't in such convoys. So this caused the Germans to devise new U-boats that traveled farther and employed hard-to-detect snorkel tubes that allowed them to remain underwater for longer periods without surfacing. Now that, in turn, caused the Allies to have very little idea where and how far German submarines might have traveled during the war. Some official accounts of U-boats claim all were destroyed, surrendered, or scuttled by the end of World War II. However, that is a doubtful proposition at best, even assuming that the Allies knew how many U-boats were actually operational. In truth, numerous German submarines and crews remained unaccounted for following the end of World War II. As writer-historian Earl Brechlin noted, there's a direct quote, some 1,154 U-boats were in operation during the war. A total of 450 were lost to Allied action or accidents. Of the 50 boats that were unaccounted for, paperwork revealed the areas they were officially assigned to, but there is no way to know if they ever reached those areas or went elsewhere later. And as expert Fred Morin of Massachusetts points out, no record of off-the-books secret missions have been found. They, the Germans, may have kept records, but I doubt they wrote everything down or that all the records have been found. Now, where might these missing U-boats have gone? We do know where one went because it was later recovered. And the story revealed can only fuel the speculation that the others might very well have gone to a secret Nazi base under the Antarctic ice. So what of the other U-boats? Could they have headed for the Nazi base in Antarctica? And if so, how could the Nazis have built such a base? And what purpose did it serve? So the U-530, the German U-boat U-530 is especially interesting because it appears to have been a new design of submarine with some special capabilities. That this submarine was assigned to a German mission suggests that the Nazi command placed high priority on the undertaking. Now, as Joseph P. Farah, a historian, wrote, and this is kind of this is a little long, so we'll just turn screen share back on so you can follow along with me. A glimpse, and this is Joseph P. Farrell, Reich of the Black Sun, Nazi secret weapons in the Cold War, Allied legend. A glimpse into this extraordinary mission and the high importance afforded by the German Navy High Command, the Oberkommando der Kriegsmarine, or OKM. To it can perhaps be afforded by a glance of the alleged performance characteristics of the U-530. In the spring of 1945, an old-fashioned type of U-boat with the number 530 was dry docked after being damaged by a freighter which had rammed it. It was, as was typical for the Kriegsmarine, a new submarine, probably a Type XXI or 21 or further development of it, was launched by approximately the same time and was given the same service number, an obvious ploy to confuse Allied military intelligence. But why was the U-boat that actually sailed to the South Atlantic that later surrendered to Argentina, probably a Type XXI or 21 or some derivative? Because Captain Wilhelm Bernhard, a pen name of the actual crew member of Captain Wermouth's U-530, let out a significant piece of information. He stated that her submerged speed was approximately 30 knots, an unheard of speed for a submerged submarine in that day. The only submarines in service in any navy in the world capable of that performance at the time were the German Type 21 U-boats. The Type 21 U-boat, like most U-boats in the German Navy at that time, was fitted with the special snorkel device that allowed its main diesel engines to operate while submerged underwater. It is quite possible that these newer Type 21 U-boats had also had the newer snorkels fitted with special anti-radar coatings, but the Type 21 was also outfitted with a special Walther turbine, an underwater jet device that utilized hydrogen peroxide that allowed great underwater cruising speeds. In effect, these turbines were silent engines, allowing great underwater speeds for for limited durations of time. My screen kind of jumped and I lost my place. Sorry about that. Thus, the Type 21 had brought submarine technology and warfare to a new and sophisticated level by war's end. The Germans had adapted special new guidance systems to missiles and torpedoes. These systems included wire guidance as well as magnetic proximity fuses. Stephen reports that on May 2nd, 1945, a flotilla of U-boats, many of them Type 21s, carefully husbanded by Donitz at Kristiansand Fjord in Norway, departed in a wolf pack for Iceland, making the traditional run through the straits between Iceland and Greenland. What happened next was the last great sea battle of the Atlantic. The German U-boat convoy ran straight into an Allied naval battle formation. The result was stunning. Using the new torpedoes, the Allied ships were totally annihilated. All right, so the U-530 later appeared in Argentina. While only speculation, it isn't too hard to imagine that the submarine and its companions might have made the journey to Neuschwabenland with supplies and personnel to extend the capabilities of the German base there. Now, was this a simple outpost with limited capabilities, or might it have been a restaging area where the Nazis would regroup and eventually use newly developed weaponry to mount a new effort to control the world? Now, officially, only 2 of the Type 21 U-boats like that captained by Admiral Donitz were ever launched. Yet, if you look at the account above, or that we looked at just a second ago, it becomes apparent that at least 3 were involved in that mission alone. And it's also known that the Germans scuttled a third 21 U-boat that might not have been one of these 3 because it was later recovered. Additionally, following World War II, France had 1 21 in active service. The USSR had 4, and some experts believe that they had more than that. And the British had 1 they put into active service after World War II. So it would appear the Germans had more than the 2 21s many historians claim was the sum total in service. How many others might have been fielded without notice by the Allies remains a question. Of those, how many might have been employed to carry men and equipment to a secret base in Antarctica? So it's no surprise that the British, US, French, and Soviet navies all put these German subs into service by giving that Type 21 U-boats were ahead of their time from a design standpoint, with the Russians actually modeling their post-World War II submarines after these German U-boats. Now, here's how one historian has described the Nazi subs. And this is a quote from Type 21 Electroboat U-boat from uboataces.com. The Type 21 was designed from the beginning as a true submarine whose natural habitat was in the depths. Almost everything about the submarine was new and out of all proportions, achieved unconventional underwater performance far beyond the capabilities of any submarine then either in service or under development. She was designed to have faster speed submerged than when running on the surface. Equipped with air conditioning, she was designed to spend most of her time underwater and could remain submerged for up to 11 days at a time, briefly surfacing for only 3 to 5 hours to recharge her batteries. For this, the Type 21 had a full streamlined outer hull and complete absence of clutter on the deck. The forward hydroplane retracted when not in use. There were no deck guns. The twin 20mm AA flak were mounted in streamlined housings, and all extending devices such as snorkel antenna and DF loop retracted into the superstructure when not in use. The Type 21 was very silent when running underwater. Her pressure hull was fabricated from 1-inch thick steel aluminum alloy, which allowed a maximum crush depth of 280 meters or 919 feet, the deepest of any military submarine at that time. The streamlined hull also offered a much smaller sonar signature, and with her silent running capability and high underwater speed, she was a much more difficult boat for enemy vessels to find or detect. Now, with a crew of 57 and a length of slightly over 251 feet, the Type 21 U-boats rivaled even today's modern submarines. At the end of World War II, the Germans had been working toward arming some of the Type 21 U-boats with V2 missiles so they could attack American cities or other targets around the world. Each missile was to be placed in a watertight container and transported underwater, at which point it could be targeted and launched. Now, here's a description of how the system would have worked. Each container displaced about 500 tons and would be kept submerged by the forward motion of the Type 21 boat. In addition to the V2 rocket, each container also held a reserve of diesel fuel intended to supply the U-boat in the course of its journey. In order to launch the missile, the ballast tanks in the container would be flooded, thus bringing it to a vertical position. After the guidance system was set, it was remotely launched from within the boat, where the missile would leave its container and head towards its target. German records indicate that orders for 3 containers were placed in December 1944, and at least 1 had been completed by the end of the war. Plans for the development of ICBM U-boats were also carried out, but these ended together with the war. Why Germany undertook yet another ambitious project at the end of the war when it was losing at all fronts is quite easily understood. The principal notion behind this was to bring the war to American soil. It was a psychological war where the Third Reich wanted to impress upon American citizens that it was not safe anymore, even on their own soil. Now, because the 21 subs were so advanced following World War II, the U.S. Navy took 2 of these German submarines, sailing them into the Atlantic. Now, during November 1946, President Harry S. Truman actually rode in the U-2513 that the Navy operated with the submarine diving to 440 feet while he was aboard. One of the U-boats was sunk by using it for target practice in 1951. The other was sold as scrap in 1956. Now, the exact number of U-boats that the Germans fielded during World War II and even which models went into production have been a matter of debate. No doubt, part of this is because the Germans were very secretive in order to keep the Allies from obtaining information that might be employed for bombing manufacturing plants. On the Allied side, the government undoubtedly downplayed German production to keep people from getting discouraged during the war effort. However, it may be that the numbers are underestimated today to downplay the possibility that large numbers of German leaders, scientists, and technicians might have escaped during the last days of the war. So it isn't too hard to see that the official numbers are low. For example, a little study of the number of 21 U-boats shows that more were operational than the official numbers show, surprising authorities when a few of those roaming the Atlantic were surrendered by their captains after World War II. Now, likewise, for years, and even in some official publications about German U-boats, authorities have claimed that the huge Type 11B, which was about a third larger than the 21, never got beyond German drawing boards. Slated to be one of the largest submarines made during World War II, the 11B had 2 twin gun turrets, each with a pair of 127 millimeter guns. The sub also boasted an Arado AR-231 float plane that was lowered into or raised from the water by an onboard crane. Now, although it supposedly never went into production, it appears that the Type 11B may have been sunk off Cape Cod, just 20 miles off of the U.S. mainland, by the U.S. Navy. And if the sunk U-boat off U.S. shores really is an 11B, it begs the question how many other 11Bs might have been built, and exactly how did Germans use these massive submarines. The Nazis also developed the Type 14 U-boats in 1942 to 1943. These massive submarines were charged with resupplying other U-boats at sea. Nicknamed milk cows, they were capable of carrying 432 tons of fuel and food. So at least one of these Type XB U-boats became operational with a length of 294 feet. This massive submarine was used as a transport, and the only known example was the U-234, which was carrying a cargo of 240 tons of machinery to Japan, possibly for the construction of aircraft and other weapons. Now, fortunately for the Allies, the submarine surrendered to U.S. forces when the crew learned that Germany had surrendered. Historian Paul W. Frame noted the irony of the capture of the submarine, which contained material that might have become a Japanese nuclear weapon, but may have been used against the nation instead. So here, let me turn screen share back on so you can follow along with me and see this picture coming up. So on May 14th, an American boarding party took over and directed the U-234 to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Much of the U-234's top secret cargo, 240 tons of documents and war materials, was shipped to Washington. A good deal was what might be expected, but the biggest surprise of all came when 10 containers marked Japanese Army were opened. They contained 560 kilograms of uranium oxide. Had the uranium reached its probable destinations, Osaka and the Riken Laboratory in Tokyo enriched via thermal diffusion might have been attempted. It also it seems possible, but by no means certain, that the captured uranium was sent to Oak Ridge and processed to help make the fuel for the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Okay, so here's World War I era German U-boat U-118 washed ashore at Hastings in 1919. So there's a picture of that. Okay. Now the Type 20 freighter U-boats were designed as undersea transports. They were designed to carry 800 tons of material and had no torpedoes or deck guns, but they did have some anti-aircraft armament. Now, while these submarines were under construction, it is unclear whether any were actually fielded, and many authorities believe they were not. So the 11, the 14, and the 21B might easily have been employed as underwater transports, ferrying men and equipment to Antarctica and in extended use for resupplying a secret German base until it could become self-sufficient. Operating under the waves for extended periods, these U-boats would have been virtually undetectable and their movements impossible to follow. And as such, they would have been ideal tools for the creation operation of a secret Nazi base. So what was the connection between NEUSCHWABENLAND and the Station 211 that Admiral Donitz, who captained the U-530 U-boat, had referred to in a speech about the new Shangri-La? Many have come to suspect that the secret base in NEUSCHWABENLAND and the Station 211 that Admiral Donitz referred to in his speech were one and the same thing. As the lecturer/historian Jerry E. Smith had noted about his study and the history of Station 211, here's a quote coming up. Most of the rumors agree that Station 211, if it really existed, was located inside a prominent ice-free mountain in the Mulig-Hoffman Mountains in NEUSCHWABENLAND, Queen Maud Land. During the period between 1956 and 1960, a Norwegian expedition mapped most of the Queen Maud Land from land surveys and air photos. Tantalizingly, they did find an ice-free mountain that matched the description of one in the Station 211 rumors. Surprisingly, we uncovered evidence that Hitler's right-hand man, Rudolf Hess, had been trusted with coordinating the effort to build Station 211. Historians have often dismissed Hess as a Nazi figurehead, positioned highly because of his total subservience to the Fuhrer, but perhaps this was because his true role was so well concealed. If so, Hess must have enlisted the aid of Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler. By sending a Nazi colony to Antarctica, Himmler believed that he was ensuring a remnant of the pure Aryan race would survive the coming cataclysm with its society and culture intact. Here's a picture. Nazi U-boat reaching Station 211 via an ice cavern. This is a painting by Duncan Long. Okay. And here's Rudolf Hess. There's a picture of him. He believed that these, and this is talking about Himmler, right? Yes. Okay, Himmler. So Himmler believed that these survivors would then take possession of Antarctica after the cataclysm had melted the South Polar ice cap. Germany built more than 24 super subs during the war. Each was the size of an aircraft carrier, but they weren't built as warships. They were underwater cargo ships. Initially, they were used to resupply the submarine wolf packs. Later, it would seem they were pressed into transporting tools, equipment, raw materials, and perhaps even slave labor to the South Polar base. Evidence suggests that the U-boat traffic to NEUSCHWABENLAND continued even after Germany's surrender in 1945. Further evidence that Station 211 existed and continued to be inhabited after the war's end can be seen in the several accounts of German naval activity after the fall of Berlin. For example, on July 10th, 1945, more than 2 months after the cessation of known hostilities, the German submarine U-530 surrendered to Argentine authorities at the port of Mar del Plata, one of the closest Argentine harbors to Antarctica. Similarly, U-977 arrived a month later in Mar del Plata in 17 August. These were but two of the boats that are believed to have made up the convoy of the Führer's final army. Could it be possible that other German U-boats, in addition to U-530 and U-977, were continuing to operate in the area following the war? There are no formal records of such activity. However, it is known that German U-boats disappeared during the war, of which only 11 are likely to have met their fate in collision with mines. It is reasonable to suppose that once the first phases of construction at Station 211 were complete, a number of experimental weapons research and development programs would have been relocated there. It's well known that the German high command hung on believing that the new weapons under development would turn the tide of the war back in Germany's favor. With ever-increasing Allied bombing and armies closing in on Germany from the east, west, and south, it would seem prudent to move one's most precious projects to somewhere beyond reach, and what could be further from the Allies' grasp than Antarctica. Okay. Now, Smith believes that efforts have also been made to be sure that the Nazi stronghold can't be visited or discovered by civilians. He noted that the area where Station 211 is located will most likely remain hidden, as it's been designated as a nature preserve. And he wrote, here's a direct quote, "During the period between 1956 and 1960, a Norwegian expedition mapped most of Queen Maud Land from land surveys and air photos. Tantalizingly, they did find an ice-free mountain that matched the description of the one in the Station 211 rumors. They called it Black Hammer or Svartharmaren. If it truly is the location of Station 211, its secret will be kept well into the century, for it has been designated an Antarctic specially protected area and site of special scientific interest under the Antarctic Conservation Act of 1978. It was listed as an exceptional natural research laboratory for research on the Antarctic petrel, Thalassosia Antarctica, excuse me, snow petrel, Pagodroma nivea, and South Polar skua, Catharacta maccormicki, and their adaptation to breeding in the inland interior of Antarctica. Access is limited to only a handful of specially selected scientists. If this is a ruse, anyone and everyone not deemed safe with the knowledge of what really went on there will be prevented from getting too close for many years to come." All right, so except for a chosen few, the area where government authorities and conventional historians maintain nothing of interest exists. It is impossible to view the area. Thus, it is impossible for anyone outside of a select few to actually check to see whether or not Neuschwabenland exists today. And in addition to believing that Station 211 might be housing Nazi operations, Smith offers another tantalizing possibility, that the Nazis' program changed with the development of UFO technology. Once they moved to Station 211, the devices were perfected and the ships were employed to attack Admiral Byrd's ships and planes that comprised the Operation High Jump expedition. The Nazi saucers were key in Neuschwabenland's defeat of Operation High Jump forces, so how did Hitler come into possession of such advanced technology? The answer to this question is as troubling as it is amazing. Those responsible for the research programs that would result in the Nazi UFOs gleaned their secrets through seances and occult forces. So I want to jump back. Into the chat, see how everybody's doing, and if there are any questions. So let's see what people are saying. Let's see. Looks like people are enjoying it. Well, what's good here is a lot of people are having conversations within the chat, which is great. Let's see. Bonnie says something going on today. Russian priest Kirill, J. Carey, and BHO have recently gone to Antarctica. Kirill took what is called the Ark of Gabriel from Saudi Arabia, and this all seems strange. Yeah, it is. It is. This is something that we talked about in the last video. It is kind of funny timing that we're doing this video right as these headlines were coming out about there being increased activity in Antarctica recently, and there's no real reason given as to why. So I'm interested to know what you guys think. A lot of people are saying they remember this as well. Yes, something is up. Why else would all the elite be going there and having a priest bless the area, says Truth Seeker. Very interesting. I didn't know about the priest. That's really interesting. Anyone know the title of the Biden trip to Antarctica video here at YouTube? I tried to do a search, could not find it. Rick asks. I don't know what it is, unfortunately. Yes, Biden and John McCain. Let's see. John Kerry went November 15th, 2016. BHO went too. Barack Obama went too, but can't find an exact date. Says it was a secret visit. Okay. Dan is asking, I just got on. Is Steve Quayle a guest, or is this guy babbling the whole time? I'm babbling the whole time. We'll have Steve Quayle as a guest later. What we're doing is going through his book. He gave me permission, exclusive to the Sharpening Report audience, exclusive to my YouTube channel here. Steve has given me permission to share his book with you guys. So we're going through his book. A lot of you have copies of his book and are following along. And if you guys want to get a copy, we're still early on in the book. There's still plenty of time to do so. You can check the links in the description below and get a copy. I highly recommend it. But you don't have to have the book to follow the video or anything like that. At the end of all this, Steve has offered to come on the channel. So we'll see if we can schedule him for an interview about his book. So that'll be fun. Thanks for the question, Dan. Let's see. Rick says, talking about submarines, I love wartime submarine movies. I watched U-571 last night. Great movie. I have not seen it. Okay, Dan is leaving because he doesn't like our format here. That's fine. And yes, also, thank you guys for not engaging with that person. I probably shouldn't even have been answering his question, but just in case other people are joining and wanting to know what was going on, why it says Steve Quayle in the title and why it's just me talking, I wanted to answer that part of the question. But just a reminder to those in the chat, if you are one who enjoys trolling or trying to get arguments going, it's not going to be successful with my audience. My audience knows to just ignore you. So any trollers or anything like that, any trolls, they'll be ignored and deleted, probably blocked from the channel too. So thank you everybody for not paying any attention to that guy. All right. Operation High Jump clearly showed a warm water oasis in Antarctica, Will Redding said. Yes, and that is also something else that we'll be getting into later throughout some more of these videos. Bonnie's confirming, yes, the Russian Orthodox priest Kirill went down there. I'll have to. That's interesting. Lynn asks, I wonder if the ice is melting in Antarctica because of heat being generated by machines under the ice. Why is that capped? And that's a good point. It very well could be if this NEUSCHWABENLAND area is actually a base. It would be interesting to see if there's more, I don't know if there would be a way to check this, but to see if there's more melting in that area of Antarctica, or if it's just all over the continent. But if it's just in that area, that would be telling. But again, I don't know. I don't know how one would even look into that, especially with that area being so hidden. I mean, you can't even really look it up on any accurate like Google Earth or something like that. Let's see. Marnie is asking, Josh, is there is a massive crack in the ice there? I didn't know that as well. It's really interesting, though it doesn't surprise me. And so is that a natural thing, or is that something caused by some of the activity? We'll have to keep reading and find out. John Lee says, isn't the Pope making a statement about extraterrestrials soon? Is it related to the activity in Antarctica? I have the book, have not read it yet. Well, I think that they're two separate issues, though they might be connected in some way. I have heard a lot about the Pope making a statement about extraterrestrials soon, and actually me and Tom Horn are hot on that trail for an upcoming project. So you'll have to stay tuned for more on that. I can't really say much more about it, but yeah, there's something strange going on there. J.R. Foster's asking, didn't John Glenn go as well? I don't know. I don't have that information. Bonnie is saying Kirill had to visit with the Pope before travel to Russia ships escorted the priest. The Pope had to see Castro and did not go with Kirill. All right. Marnie's saying NASA Operation Ice Bridge discovers massive crack in ice shelf. Thank you for that headline. I'll have to check that out. Lynn says, thank you, Josh. You're very welcome, Lynn. My pleasure, and thank you. Bonnie says, Josh, you're going to have to write a book from the chat. LOL. Yeah, no kidding. But that's a good problem to have. It's always good to see a lot of turnout and people, engaging in good conversation and respectful conversation. That's great to see. Well, the next chapter that we're going to be looking at, and we'll do it next week. It's going to be on Nazi UFOs. I would do it this week, but it's a very long chapter. We got like 40 pages to go through, and usually I want to keep these between 1 and 2 hours. So we'll have to save that for next week. Again, if this is your first time joining, thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for joining in the chat and for just checking out the video. If you didn't catch the live video and you're watching the archived version, that is great. Please help by subscribing and sharing, liking the video, commenting. You can tell us what you think in the comments below. But yeah, everybody that joined live, thank you so much. We'll be talking about Nazi UFOs next week. And unfortunately, because of YouTube's way of doing things, I can't actually use the word Nazi in the title, description, or tags. I actually had that with the last video, and they wouldn't allow me to monetize it. And then the only change that I made was I took out the word Nazi, and then it was fine. So I guess YouTube doesn't like the word Nazi, even if it's used in an appropriate context. So when you see it, it won't actually say Nazi UFOs, but that's what it's going to be about. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, we got a lot of people saying thank you for the show. Thank you all for joining me here. This has been a blast. Always is. I'm really excited for next week. UFOs and aliens and that kind of stuff. That I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. And this stuff is interesting too, but this provides a lot of groundwork for where we're going next. And again, if you're going to be in the Dallas area around late March, early April, join me at the Hear the Watchman conference. I'm going to be speaking there. It's going to be phenomenal. Mike Norris, actually Chuck Norris's son, is going to be there. John B. Wells is going to be there. Derek and Sharon Gilbert, Jake Rahutsky from Skywatch TV are all going to be there. Josh Tolley. There's a lot of great guests, the whole lineup, which you can check out at the Hear the Watchman website. But if you want to get tickets, if you use the promo code PECK, just P-E-C-K, you put that in when you get your tickets, and you'll get a discount. And the best way to get the tickets is to go in the description below. There's a link. You can click on that. It'll bring you right to it. I've also been told that this conference is unique in that everything is happening in one large room, which means you won't have to pick and choose which speakers you want to see. You'll be able to see all of them. And actually, the speakers will be viewing all the presentations with you. So it'll be a lot of fun. It's really super interactive. And I'm excited for it. As you should be as well. So if you want to join me, if you want to come meet me and talk to me, and I'd be happy to meet all of you. It'd be my honor to meet all of you. I always have fun at these things. I love meeting my audience and subscribers and all you people. I would love it if you want to do that. So it's March 31st through April 2nd. It's on a weekend. It's going to be a blast. Get your tickets, promo code PECK. You'll get some money off. You'll get a discount. The people at Hear the Watchman were nice enough to offer a discount to my audience here. So make sure you put that promo code in, and you'll get a special discount on your tickets. Also, make sure that you get the tickets fast because they're going to sell out. I have no doubt that they're going to sell out fast. So get your tickets while you can. Now would be the best time to do it. So make sure you do that. Okay, and again, if you want to get Steve's book that we're talking about, links in the description below. There's 3 different places where you can get where you can get the book. And I think that's everything. Don't forget to subscribe. All right, we got other people saying thank you. Will is saying thanks, Josh. Happy I could catch the live event and participate. I'm really glad that you were able to. Also, I'm always happy when people are able to join in. Truth Seeker saying I'd love to attend that, but I'm in Canada and will cost too much. Is there any chance you are coming to Vancouver? Well, I'll tell you what, if they put on a conference in Vancouver and invite me, and if I'm able to, I'll be happy to do so. But yeah, I understand that would be a long trip. I guess that's it. So thank you, everybody. Until next week, take care and God bless.